Years of cutbacks by successive state governments has inevitably raised questions about Mona Vale Hospital's efficiency, effectiveness and cleanliness. So we went to the federal government's My Hospital website for an unbiased overview. Here you can directly compare hospitals. We found that Mona Vale Hospital has an average cost of care that's lower than its peer group, so it's an efficient hospital. Mona Vale Hospital has significantly less golden staph infections than its peer group, so it's a relatively clean hospital, and median waiting times for septoplasty, tonsillectomy and ear, nose and throat surgery are lower at Mona Vale. Finally, Mona Vale handles more than 7,000 medical emergency admissions a year, around 20 per day.
I'm Alex McTaggart. I had the very great pleasure of being both the Mayor of Pittwater and the independent member for Pittwater in the New South Wales Parliament. Now that building that you see behind me is the tower at Mona Vale Hospital. Now I and many good community representatives fought long and hard to have our hospital upgraded to a level 5 hospital. Now sadly we lost that fight. So when the new hospital, the new private hospital at Frenchs Forest is completed, maternity, surgery, ICU and accident and emergency will be relocated to Frenchs Forest. Mona Vale will become a health ancillary location. Now we hear that the health bureaucrats wish to demolish that tower. They're citing concrete cancer, leaky windows as the rationale to demolish our tower. The tower's been a beacon of community spirit for the last 60 years. Births, accidents, deaths, it's the single most uniting asset in our community.
Here at the corner of Coronation Street and Pittwater Road at Mona Vale is the last remnant of the Black Swamp. The Black Swamp once stretched from this point all the way through to Widderarami Bay on Pittwater and across to the sand dunes that fringe Mona Vale and Bongan beaches. It's classified swamp oak swamp plain forest and it's an ecologically endangered vegetation community. In fact, it's so rare that what you're looking at here is pretty well the sum total of what remains on the northern beaches. Pittwater Road still runs along the side of the swamp all the way through Bayview to Church Point. Barrenjoey Road ran both beside and across the Black Swamp to reach Bassett Street where the swamp ended. Both these roads originated as Aboriginal pathways that were followed by Governor Phillip and other early explorers. Also fringing the Black Swamp is the higher ground on which Mona Vale Hospital stands. This land has an interesting history, and what happens with this land in the future is also of major interest to the people of Pittwater. Alexander MacDonald was a private marine who arrived in the First Fleet on board the Friendship. In January 1792, he received a 130-acre grant at Field of Mars, near today's Ryde. MacDonald was a successful farmer and he received further grants of land. Mary Oliver had been sentenced to be transported for 14 years. She arrived in New South Wales aboard the ship Mary Ann in 1791 and was married to Alexander MacDonald in March 1792. Mary had left a daughter behind in England, Barbara, who was only 7 when the mother was transported. Back in England, Barbara would marry a Thomas Styles and had 3 children with him. In June 1806, Mary wrote to Barbara, her daughter, sending love and suggesting she come to New South Wales. She told how they were living at Field of Mars, that her husband had come free with Governor Phillip, and that they had no children of their own. The Styles family eventually came to New South Wales, arriving aboard the ship Mary Ann in January 1816, encouraged by the prospect of a substantial inheritance. 60 acres of land fronting Warriewood Beach was granted to Alexander MacDonald in 1813. An adjacent grant he already held was enlarged to 80 acres in 1816. He applied for and received a further 60 acres in March 1821, taking his holdings to 200 acres. In May 1821, Alexander MacDonald made a new will, making his wife Mary his heir, but cutting Mary's daughter, Barbara, out of any inheritance. A few days later, Edward Farrell, William Sheen and Patrick Fox were indicted for stealing a sheep, and Thomas and Barbara Styles were also indicted as accessories and receivers. Thomas was acquitted, but Barbara, who'd come out a free woman, was sentenced to life transportation at Newcastle. Just a few months later, in December 1821, Alexander and Mary MacDonald, with their son-in-law Thomas Styles, were returning home to Field of Mars from Sydney Market when their boat upset on the Parramatta River and they were all drowned. An inquest was held, the verdict being accidentally drowned, in consequence of the whole party being in a state of intoxication and quarrelling. In that awful state, moralised the Sydney Gazette, they sank into eternity. Barbara Styles and her children challenged the will, but were unsuccessful. The executors determined Alexander MacDonald's Narrabeen land should be left to 6-year-old Elizabeth Jenkins, the eldest child of his good friend James Jenkins. At the time, James Jenkins farmed at Ryde, and it seems that MacDonald's bequest to his daughter drew Jenkins' attention to the agricultural potential of the Pittwater area. He applied for and received grants of 250 and 100 acres, and he purchased other blocks. When James Jenkins died in 1835, his Warriewood land passed to his wife Elizabeth Sr. When she died in 1874, the Warriewood land was divided between 3 of the Jenkins children. Elizabeth Jr. added her share to the 200 acres she'd inherited from MacDonald some 50 years before, so that she now owned all of the coastal strip from today's Pacific Parade at Dee Why, right through to a little beyond the position of today's Mona Vale Hospital. In 1891, Elizabeth gave 40 acres of her land at Dee Why to the Salvation Army, plus a donation of £400 to allow them to build a home of rest on it. Its purpose was to give Army officers a place to take a break, to recuperate from their ministering activities. But Elizabeth also had a significant shareholding in the Australian Banking Company, which crashed in the economic depression of the 1890s. Frightened of bankruptcy, she made a deal with the Salvation Army, in which she gave the Army her land in return for a release from any obligations to the bank's depositors, along with an annuity for herself and her family, until she died, which occurred in 1900. In the early 1930s, Warringah Council drained the swamp, which covered much of the present-day Mona Vale golf course. The Salvation Army agreed to sell part of its land south of the swamp to the golf club for another 9 holes, but the sale fell through when the Salvos insisted on a covenant preventing play and liquor sales on a Sunday. Then, in the late 1930s, the threat of war with Japan saw an army training camp established on the land, and it persisted there throughout the war years. On the 7th of January 1955, the Carl Labor government signalled resumption of the Jenkins Mona Vale estate from the Salvation Army for the purposes of a public hospital. Resumption G274276 was completed on the 7th of April 1955. On the 12th of April 1955, the Mona Vale Hospital land G274276 was transferred from the Cumberland County Council to Manly District Hospital for the sum of £100. An estate in fee simple was issued on the 3rd of November 1955, describing resumption G274276 as being part of portions 11 and 12 separately granted to James Jenkins and Elizabeth Jenkins on the 19th of October 1831, excepting minerals. Minerals aside, there is no caveat or other condition on the hospital land. In 1959, the Salvation Army was paid £34,162, 9 shillings and 9pence, including interest, which represented market value for the land as calculated by the Valuer-General. In May 1961, a tender for the building of Mona Vale Hospital was won by T.C. Whittle, and the almost completed building was officially opened on the 22nd of February 1964 by the then Minister for Health, the Honourable W. Sheehan. On the 15th of May 1964, the land was finally transferred back from Manly District Hospital to the possession of Mona Vale District Hospital for the consideration of 10 shillings. There are several persistent rumours about the Mona Vale Hospital land, one being that it was gifted to the people of New South Wales by the Salvation Army in perpetuity. It clearly has no basis in fact. Another is that Premier Robin Askin built the hospital. But this is impossible because the hospital was completed and opened a full year before the Liberals won office in 1965, that being when Askin became Premier. The only discernible connection between Askin and the building of the hospital is that Askin was present at the laying of the foundation stone in January 1962 in his capacity as member for Collaroy. A third rumour claims the site is dedicated for a hospital to the exclusion of all else. Again, this is simply wrong. It is possible, and even probable, that these rumours are based upon, but confused with, the true story of Elizabeth Jenkins' 1891 gift of land and money at Dee Why to build the Eventide Home of Rest for Salvation Army officers. The new hospital was a tremendous boon for Pittwater. Up until now, we'd all had to traipse into Manly, often having to walk up that bloody great hill to North Head, just as my father had done in army uniform in 1942, except that he ran all the way, though not fast enough to catch his dying mother's last moments. Suddenly, we had a life-saving hospital that was easily accessible, and I was an early beneficiary after a terrible fall from a galloping horse, and so too were thousands of other injured or ill Pittwater people, with a tremendous number of local children being born there, including my 2 daughters and a grandchild. Our parents were nursed there too. A great many Pittwater residents have similar memories, and they are strong. Perhaps it was all too good to be true, because the future of Manly and Mona Vale hospitals became the subject of debate. Were 2 hospitals required on Sydney's northern beaches? And if there was to be only one, where should it be located? Needless to say, there was no debate from a Pittwater perspective, especially as Mona Vale is extremely well located on the northern beaches proper, being virtually equidistant from both Barrenjoey and Manly Hospital. It requires a major stretch of imagination to believe that French's Forest is part of the northern beaches, seeing that it's 7 kilometres to the nearest beach. In fact, Pennant Hills or Silverwater is closer to French's Forest than Palm Beach. By 2000, there were grave concerns over the continuing downgrading of services at Mona Vale Hospital. There was also a marked lack of any capital improvement. Even more conspicuous was the lack of basic maintenance. This downhill spiral generated strong community suspicion that the government was planning to close Mona Vale Hospital and sell off the land. Looking back at the 6,000-strong rally held at Rat Park in February 2001, it's remarkable that the issues and fears expressed at that time, and the public's cynicism regarding government intentions, remain virtually unchanged today.
At the moment, I feel that they have let it down by not doing repairs to it as it should. Perhaps it is to try and get us not to want the Mona Vale Hospital, but I want the hospital to remain.
Most telling was how Pittwater Council's strong advocacy for Mona Vale Hospital was in lockstep with the Pittwater community.
And our community sent back 6,000 of these surveys, and it was compiled by the University of Western Sydney, and it was 97% in favour of retaining and upgrading Mona Vale Hospital.
The New South Wales Legislative Council held an inquiry into the operation of Mona Vale Hospital that was published in 2005. It confirmed that there was no caveat on the land nor impediment to its sale by the government if it so desired. By that time, the land was valued at $25 million. The inquiry received 2,336 submissions, the largest number ever received by a Legislative Council Committee of Inquiry. It was recommended that New South Wales Health immediately commence the physical upgrade of the emergency department, hire 2 new emergency department specialists and enhance ICU services to level 4 standard. Further, regardless of where the new Northern Beaches Hospital might be built, that Mona Vale Hospital should be funded, staffed and equipped to provide an ongoing, effective 24-hour emergency department service. The concluding recommendation was that the New South Wales Government should announce that all of the Mona Vale Hospital land should be retained for health services. From the time he was elected in 1995, Pittwater MP John Brogden often confronted the Carr Labor government over health issues.
You all know that when it rains, the parkway floods. And I can sure as hell tell you that there's no funding for an upgrade of the Wakehurst Parkway in the $160 million the government's putting forward to build a new hospital. It would cost less to upgrade Manly and Mona Vale than it would to build a new hospital. It would cost less just to upgrade Mona Vale than to build a new hospital. So in essence, the most cost-effective options are those that keep the facilities we've got or upgrade Mona Vale. The most expensive option that begins to waste your taxpayer funds is a brand new Taj Mahal somewhere in between that will significantly put at risk the access to health services of the 55,000 people who live in Pittwater. Now let's not forget that over 1,000 of the people who live in Pittwater have only one way of getting back to the mainland, and that's the people who live on Scotland Island and the Western Foreshores, who need to get a boat first before they get to the road, before they get in an ambulance, and before they go to a new hospital at French's Forest. And they drive past a perfectly good hospital and a perfectly good site just up the road at Mona Vale.
But Brogden came under fire for offensive behaviour at a function in Sydney in late July 2005, and he resigned soon after. At the subsequent by-election, the Liberals' 32-year hold on Pittwater was truncated with a 25% swing to independent Alex McTaggart. McTaggart had campaigned strongly on a Save Mona Vale Hospital platform. In an interview with the ABC's Quinton Dempster, McTaggart was both succinct and prescient. "There's been a significant neglect of this area by the major parties," he said. "I presume that Labor don't bother because they never thought they could win, and the Liberals have been too busy getting on with the business of trying to win government while ignoring community issues. So there's been a backlash. I can assure you that if I don't perform, they'll give me the flick too, because they've just had a taste of what they can do." The hospital remained an unsolved problem and a potent issue, so that in the run-up to the 2007 election, Liberal candidate Robert Gordon-Stokes, a former advisor to Brogden, was also campaigning strongly for Mona Vale Hospital. Here he is.
And Neville ran shortly after he promised that Sydney Hospital would never be closed, along with his minister Laurie Brereton, did effectively that. Sure, they could say that there's still a hospital there, but that's not a hospital. Not what's left at Sydney. That's not what we need at Mona Vale. The Liberal policy on Mona Vale Hospital is to maintain and upgrade Mona Vale Hospital. Now, what sorts of services do we need there? Well, there are 2 key demographics we have here in Pittwater. One, the largest, is the one that I'm part of, and that's the demographic that is having kids, and they need paediatric services and maternity services. The other big demographic is the over 65s. Within 15 years, more than 20% of Pittwater's population will be over 65. They need the existing orthopaedic services, for things like hips and knees, and a range of geriatric services. Both of those things require an intensive care unit. So we need to maintain and upgrade our existing hospital.
Hear, hear.
How can we deliver that? Well, if we are elected to government, that will be easy.
Sure enough, McTaggart got the flick, and Pittwater was returned to the Liberals' Rob Stokes. Having jumped out of the Liberal fold just 2 years before, Pittwater apparently couldn't wait to get back in. In 2009, the obstetrics ward was temporarily closed at Mona Vale while asbestos was removed. Then the executive announced it would not be returning the unit to the hospital. In May 2013, Health Minister Gillian Skinner announced that the Northern Beaches Hospital would be built at French's Forest by 2018. Manly Hospital would be closed and Mona Vale downgraded. Mona Vale would now become what might be termed a health campus, a concentration of private medical interests with minimal public facilities. The New South Wales Government appears to have abandoned the concept of a public hospital at Mona Vale in direct opposition to the clear and strong recommendations of the 2005 parliamentary inquiry. In 2017, Stokes came under sustained attack by a local GP, Dr Suzanne Daly.
As soon as I had the necessary 10,000, I actually ended up with 11,860 something signatures. I made an appointment with Rob Stokes. I handed him the petition. And he said, well, he didn't really want to give it in at that moment because it would be too rushed. The stamp on it says it was presented to Parliament in March the following year. So there was already a delay of 5 months. It was finally heard in May. Mr Stokes got up, he presented the petition, he did not read it out. So the voices of the people have not been heard on this issue. A
pattern emerges whereby Stokes campaigns to save Mona Vale Hospital to appease resident fears and win the election, but in fact works against the hospital by burying the 2005 parliamentary inquiry recommendations, by delaying introduction of the petition to Parliament so as to slow its momentum, and by privatising medical services at Mona Vale Hospital. It is becoming abundantly clear that in Pittwater, 20 years of strong community representation cuts no ice with the New South Wales Government. In a March 2017 interview, Stokes confirmed that once the new Northern Beaches Hospital at Frenchs Forest was completed, probably in 2018, Mona Vale Hospital would be demolished.
The main block of the hospital will come down. It won't come down, obviously, until it's vacant. So it will be once the new hospital is open.
Resident fears, expressed so powerfully from 2000 through to the present day, appear to be confirmed. Given that the building is only 50 years old, and it's the most significant community asset in Pittwater by a country mile, this seems extraordinary. So we asked for the justification.
In relation to the deterioration of the building itself, anyone who walks around or looks at the building will understand that it is in a deteriorated state. As you recall, when we came in, there was a situation where the perimeter of the building was fenced because there was risk of windows falling out of the building. The deterioration had got to that level. So we did the audit, and that audit told us independently that firstly the building was designed with a design life of 50 years, but that the evidence was that that design life was compromised because of its exposed condition, because of its coastal environment. It had faced significant deterioration.
So we went to Jeff Conan, who was a project manager for TC Whittle, the builder of Mona Vale Hospital. Conan has since delivered buildings throughout Australia, including many on the Gold Coast.
Well, everything TC Whittle built was good. They never built a bad building.
Now this building is by the sea. It's very close to the sea. How do you think that might have affected the...
Well, it doesn't. I did a lot of work with the University of Queensland, and we found that for every 3 metres, 10 feet in those days, that you move away from the actual high water mark of a surf beach, the amount of salt environment and therefore the amount of concrete cancer drops off dramatically. Not only every 3 metres you move back from the water's edge, but for every 3 metres you go up from the water in height, in stories. So the distance here from the water's edge wouldn't substantially affect this building if it's maintained in a reasonable amount way, which you'd expect any government to do, or they should resign.
The other problematic issue in the hospital has long been that there is asbestos throughout the building. It is the type of asbestos that deteriorates with age, so we've managed that as best we can, and significant money's been spent on trying to cut out bits of asbestos where there's a particularly acute safety risk.
We understand that when level 5 was upgraded for maternity and level 6 for paediatrics, the asbestos was removed from those floors, as well as the ground floor service level. Given there are 6 floors and 3 are already asbestos free, the job is already half done. If the building is to be demolished, as Stokes maintains, the remaining 3 levels must be cleaned of all asbestos prior to demolition. So there's no money to be saved, asbestos-wise, by demolition. The government's asbestos argument is a furphy.
But the simple reality is that all of the mechanical and electrical systems are past their serviceable life, and we've put new lifts in. We've done a few things, but the central building, the nurses' accommodation, the engineering section, you walk around the building, they are tired, they are old, and that they are into their life and they need to be replaced.
There's not one bit of breakdown in the concrete which would have any effect on the integrity, structural integrity of the building. Remove all the defective concrete, clean the steel, cut it out where it's too close to the surface, and patch it with proper chemically engineered cements. The quote for it, you'd do the whole lot that we've seen here for $3,000, but you get a specialist in and you'd probably charge you $30,000. It's a con game. Concrete pair works because you can't quantify it. Yeah. If someone tells you that that's very bad, it's going to fall down, the average person will say, oh, it's very bad, it's going to fall down. It's not bad at all. This building's over-designed to blazes. You can take half of it away and it'll still stand up.
Yeah. So we put it to Stokes that the building remains sound, and if it was no longer to be a hospital, that it could be repurposed.
I would disagree on the basis of the evidence I've received. I think from memory a deterioration report was done by Arup Consulting Engineers. According to consulting engineers, that building is at the end of its life and needs to be replaced. It is at the end of its life.
We asked Stokes for the Arup report, but he didn't follow through. Instead, we were fobbed off with a one-page summary which said little more than that there had been ineffective maintenance, there was concrete cancer and the roof leaked. So we chased Stokes' office weekly for some months, but by April we were eventually forced to make a Freedom of Information request to GIPA to the Department of Health. Stokes' office then said that seeing we'd applied for the GIPA, it could no longer help us. Freedom from information might be more like it. On the 5th of June we finally got a response to the GIPA in the form of 5 building reports, all of which related to the building's facade. The Arup report that Stokes referred to is dated September 2010, so it was actually commissioned by the previous government. The executive summary points out that the hospital building facade is in generally poor condition regarding the facade brickwork, cement render and the aluminium window panels and sunshades. The roof also needed repairs. But this has already been addressed by the O'Farrell government with a $2 million expenditure. The report's conclusion states that the structural elements of the building are in fair to good condition without the structure requiring significant remedial work. This relatively minor report is the government's principal justification for demolition.
So what's your assessment? It's not a bad building.
There is no way you can justify pulling this building down unless it was to build a better and more up-to-date hospital. There's nothing wrong with the building. So any excuse given to pull it down is the building's at fault is just an excuse to pull it down because someone wants the land.
The report's concluding statement that it is worth considering if the facility is still functional and does it satisfy its intended use has become justification for total demolition.
Where the main block will be a park with the health services located across the rest of the site. At the moment, obviously there's a main block and a whole lot of lawns. We're filling up the lawns with medical services. When that main block comes down, all those facilities will open out onto that central plaza or central lawn area.
So this is going to be a vacant space. So what?
There'll be far more built space. Admittedly, it won't be high rise. It'll be a low rise building around a central square rather than a central building surrounded by lawns.
Will the central square be the size of the current building?
No. I mean, you can overlay it. Yes.
So, in other words, a lot of the land will be built on by private interests who are invited in to supply medical services?
The entire site will remain in public ownership. There will be a range of medical services provided there, both public and private. But
no surgical services?
No, a lot of it will depend upon the results of the ROI that's currently underway. But straight away, I mean, we've already put all the dental surgery, adult, paediatric, is part of the new community health centre that you can go and have a look at.
Medical services.
So
not surgical services.
Well, no, I said, I mean, they're dental chairs, so there's surgery
not
going
dental.
on there. No, there will be dental. And that's
no, I'm not talking about dental.
Yeah.
I'm talking about acute appendicitis or something.
Well, it depends upon, again, what the proposals that come in, but certainly something that there's been strong interest in is to provide surgical services at Mona Vale.
In the public sphere?
No, these would be day surgeries.
A private day surgery centre?
Yes.
And I want to know if there, in an area of this, there is a backup theatre for midwives.
No.
Where are the inpatients here?
Okay.
A hospital has to have inpatients. The definition of hospital came from hotel. Inpatients, not outpatients.
Stokes wants Mona Vale Hospital pulled down and the site covered with low-rise privatised medical buildings, save for a small central park where the main hospital building now stands. This village park will be much smaller than the main hospital building footprint. Anodyne euphemisms are calculated to soothe anxieties. What's not to like about a central village green? Well, plenty actually, because once the footprint of the main building is built upon, it becomes a fait accompli. A new hospital can never rise there again. So while America has been struggling to get an Australian-style public health system, in New South Wales we're going the other way at a rate of knots, and the demolition of Mona Vale General Hospital's main building will lock this into place for all time, given that the maturation of the privatised medical leases is staggered. Ideology now presides over the public interest. Land that was taken from the first Australians, granted to Alexander MacDonald, inherited by Elizabeth Jenkins, given to the Salvation Army, and resumed by the New South Wales Government for a public hospital, will become the domain of private medical practitioners on a peppercorn rent, all hidden from public scrutiny by commercial incompetence. Surely the people of Pittwater and of New South Wales deserve better than this.
This hospital has been so important to my family and myself for many years. First Mum and Dad, but mainly because my son at 17 had a massive asthma attack, and by the time his sister and brother rushed him here to the hospital, he'd stopped breathing. So it was the proximity of this hospital which saved his life.
My name's David James. I'm a former Pittwater councillor and a Warringah councillor, and Mayor of Pittwater for several years. I'm concerned about what's going to happen with these buildings, and I think it would be a real shame if they are simply demolished, because I'm advised that they're quite sound.
If we can reuse a 150-year-old wharf or wharves in Sydney Harbour, or bond stores in the Rocks or in Darling Harbour, surely we can find an alternative use for a 60-year-old building in Pittwater.
One of the things that there's a crying need for is for accommodation for health workers, service workers and so on, and I think that this offers an opportunity for us to provide accommodation, affordable accommodation for those sorts of people who otherwise have got to come from a very, very long way away.
It's a secure building. What about a refuge for women and children who are escaping domestic violence? We don't have enough accommodation for them.
And I wrote to the community and I said, does anyone out in the community have similar experience of their family or neighbours whose lives have been saved by the proximity of Mona Vale Hospital? And I got 6,000 letters.
I think it's time that the community was involved in the consultation process and made part of the decision-making process, and not being sidelined and told, fed like jooks.
It's the tyranny of distance. When you live in Pittwater, from Barrenjoey out offshore at Scotland Island, or just up the road at Bayview, we haven't got an emergency centre somewhere in that vicinity, you're dead.
But if the health bureaucrats are dead set keen to knock it down, then we have to demonstrate that there are other uses. This building has a value. These people know the price of everything and the value of nothing, and this is part of our community.
The government would do very, very well to announce a competition, a design competition, which looks at the needs basis for providing for housing for younger people, particularly affordable housing, and who knows what architects might come up with.
The community's got to be consulted. We've got to be part of the decision-making process. Who knows what will come out of it, but if you knock it down, it's gone, and that's dumb. Dumb, dumb, dumb.
And Pittwater people care about this hospital, and they want it to be used for medical purposes, not to be just money in the pockets of developers.
This is a much-loved public facility, no less than the beautiful land we stand on and the beach across the way. This must be preserved for the public.
My son had suffered flu-like symptoms for 2 weeks, and one day before the October long weekend last year, he presented himself with uncontrollable temperatures and vomiting. He was running a temperature of about 40 degrees, and I called for an ambulance and was denied the service, where they suggested that I take my son to hospital myself. We did. I don't know how. As I was putting his shoes on, I noticed that his eye had hemorrhaged and there were tiny red dots all over his body. The staff at Mona Vale Hospital acted quickly and treated him with antibiotics for something which seemed to be tonsillitis that may have gone septic. However, some hours later, he deteriorated rapidly. His stomach was starting to eat itself due to the amount of acid. He was coughing up fully oxygenated blood from his lungs. He was in agony, and he was struggling to breathe. I learned that at Mona Vale Hospital we no longer have ICU, but we have HCU, which is high care unit. And that meant that they would not be able to handle any organ failure at all. My son is an elite athlete. He represented Australia 2 months prior at the Junior World Kayak Championships, and now he lay there fighting for his life. We had no idea what the infection was. After 5 days in HCU, we discovered that Jacob had contracted meningococcal septicemia, or Neisseria meningitis. I believe that it is our responsibility as a community to retain Mona Vale Hospital, because without Mona Vale Hospital, my son would be dead.
So why is your minister interested in St Edward's Hospital?
Well, he's apparently greatly concerned that it has no patients.
Takes all sorts.
Yes.
How can there be patients when it has no nursing staff?
Well, quite.
Thank you. Having patients around would be no help at all.
They'd just be in the way. My minister may want to shut the whole place.
Impossible.